This is Defense Domain, your source for strategic insight on global security, defense systems, and geopolitical risk. This is the weekly strategic brief. This week is defined by a widening conflict architecture centered in the Middle East. A central war dynamic is now driving multi-theater escalation, pulling regional states, proxy actors, and external powers into a shared operational space. This expanding geography is increasing escalation complexity and stretching traditional containment frameworks. At the same time, NATO cohesion is showing visible strain. Basing restrictions and ambiguity around Article 5 commitments are creating strategic gaps. These gaps are increasingly exploitable as transactional security logic begins to replace fixed collective defense structures. Warfare itself is also shifting. The focus is moving beyond conventional military targets toward the degradation of economic and civilian lifelines. Strikes on energy infrastructure, desalination facilities, and industrial nodes indicate a transition towards system-level warfare. From a broader perspective, global power dynamics are shifting toward decentralized maritime governance and conditional alliance structures. Control over strategic choke points is becoming increasingly contested and less centrally managed. Turning to the regional conflict assessment, the Iran war has now entered its fifth week and evolved into a sustained, multi-domain conflict system. The scale of activity is significant. Missile waves have exceeded 100. Naval assets have been degraded at scale. Commercial shipping has been disrupted across multiple routes. Hundreds of vessels have been halted or rerouted. The conflict now spans multiple theaters, affecting a growing number of countries. More importantly, the operational pattern has shifted. The conflict has progressed from initial decapitation strikes into a systemic warfare phase. Operations are now persistent, continuous, and multi-domain. Maritime space has become a central battle space. Sustained vessel attacks, naval strikes, and mine-related threats indicate a shift from disruption to continuous contestation. Proxy warfare has also evolved. Iran-aligned groups are now operating as a persistent pressure layer, targeting bases, diplomatic sites, and coalition forces across multiple theaters. Energy systems are shaping the global impact of the conflict. Strikes on LNG facilities, refineries, desalination plants, and export infrastructure are transforming the conflict into a driver of systemic economic disruption. At the same time, operational tempo has stabilized at a high-intensity baseline. This is no longer episodic warfare. It is continuous. Geographically, the conflict is also expanding outward. Incidents near Turkish airspace, Cyprus, and NATO-linked facilities are increasing escalation complexity beyond the core theater. This week reflects a clear strategic shift. Maritime conflict has become sustained. Proxy attacks are now continuous. Energy targeting has evolved into systemic economic pressure, and spillover risk toward NATO-adjacent regions is increasing. Several developments illustrate this transition. Houthi missile strikes on Israel have opened a new operational front. This expands the conflict beyond core state actors and complicates containment across interconnected theaters. The deployment of U.S. 82nd Airborne units signals a shift towards scalable ground force readiness. This approach preserves flexibility while maintaining ambiguity over direct engagement. The United Kingdom's deployment of counter-drone systems in Kuwait reflects an adaptive defensive posture. The focus is on protecting critical infrastructure rather than direct retaliation. At the same time, infrastructure targeting is becoming systematic. Strikes on transport nodes, combined with attacks on desalination plants and refineries, indicate a deliberate focus on civilian systems. These actions are extending the conflict's impact into energy, water, and mobility. Humanitarian and peacekeeping actors are also increasingly exposed. Strikes affecting civilian infrastructure and UN personnel highlight the erosion of protected spaces beyond the immediate conflict zone. Kosovo's participation in a U.S.-backed Gaza force signals the expansion of multinational stabilization mechanisms. However, political constraints remain. Disagreements over sequencing between withdrawal and disarmament continue to limit stabilization efforts. Russia has also introduced a horizontal escalation signal. It warned that countries enabling Ukrainian drone operations could become targets of retaliation. This increases risk exposure for NATO-adjacent states. Meanwhile, China's mediation efforts between Pakistan and Afghanistan reflect attempts to contain localized instability through structured diplomacy. Taken together, regional stability is now defined by sustained multi-theater pressure and interconnected escalation pathways. Conflict dynamics are no longer geographically bounded. Turning to energy and maritime security, the Strait of Hormuz has become a focal point of competing governance models. Regional actors are proposing new frameworks for managing maritime transit. At the same time, Iran is implementing a selective access policy. This effectively transforms the strait into a conditional and negotiated transit space. The disruption of Qatar's LNG exports represents a major shock to global energy supply. The scale and duration of the damage indicate structural disruption rather than temporary outage. Efforts to restore maritime security remain fragmented. Coalition initiatives are still in early stages. UN-led mechanisms are emerging, but face operational challenges in a contested environment. At the same time, Ukraine is expanding its campaign against Russia's energy system. The focus has shifted from isolated strikes to cumulative system degradation. Logistics, storage, and refining capacity are being targeted simultaneously. This reflects a systemic approach to energy disruption. In the hybrid domain, NATO is expanding its focus on cognitive warfare and societal resilience. Operations now integrate cyber defense, infrastructure protection, and public awareness. Russia continues to combine cyber operations and disinformation to shape institutional outcomes. A major breach of European Commission cloud systems highlights vulnerabilities in shared digital infrastructure. Hybrid warfare is now blurring the boundary between institutional security and societal resilience. In the defense industry domain, Ukraine is expanding partnerships with Gulf countries. It is exporting operational expertise in drone warfare and air defense. At the same time, industrial targets are becoming part of the conflict. Strikes on aluminum production facilities are extending disruption into global supply chains. Ukraine is also targeting missile production infrastructure to degrade long-term military capacity. Meanwhile, structural challenges remain in major defense programs. Japan's integration of long-range strike capabilities marks a shift toward active deterrence. U.S. laser weapon testing reflects ongoing technological transition, but also highlights scalability challenges. Defense industrial sustainability is emerging as a central vulnerability. From a global power perspective, alliance fragmentation is becoming increasingly visible. European states are limiting operational support. Signals from Washington suggest a shift toward conditional security commitments. Divisions within the United Nations are constraining collective action. Crisis response is increasingly shifting toward coalition-based and regional arrangements. Russia's nuclear signaling reflects controlled escalation within strategic competition. In the Arctic, geopolitical pressures are reshaping long-term alignments. At the same time, structural inconsistencies in U.S. strategy are affecting operational capacity. The withdrawal of NATO personnel from Iraq reflects the broader impact of regional spillover. Taken together, global power competition is increasingly defined by institutional fragmentation. Looking ahead, climate dynamics are accelerating competition in the Arctic. At the same time, environmental disruption is increasing risks to global stability. The degradation of humanitarian infrastructure is raising the civilian cost of conflict. Across domains, defense alignments are becoming more transactional. Industrial systems are emerging as primary targets, and maritime governance is becoming increasingly fragmented. Looking ahead to next week, key developments include potential UN action on Hormuz, follow-up to regional mediation efforts, further expansion of U.S. force posture, deployment of UK air defense systems, continued Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, and progress in maritime coalition formation. This was the Defense Domain Weekly Strategic Brief. For more in-depth analysis, visit defensedomain.com. Stay informed, stay strategic.